Morning. We are in Luke chapter 6, beginning a new chapter. Luke 6. You can't hear? Do you have me turn? There it is. Luke 6. I don't want to talk loud.
We understand that, but me above everybody else besides Sherry.
I'll let David be my interpreter. Good morning. Good morning. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. All right. Luke 6. We have come off of the event where Jesus has healed a paralytic that's been carried by some friends before him, and that caused a lot of angst by the religious leaders because Jesus setting things up as, for them to see him as being who he claims to be, the Son of God. And we also noticed that in the final part of that, in regard to the new wine and old wineskins, and the analogies that are being used. I think the key to the whole scenario here is in verse 39, the last verse of chapter 5. And no one after drinking old wine desires new, for he says, the old is good. I think that is an interesting statement that characterizes the Pharisees and all of them. They are so steeped in their traditions, and it would be interesting to think about how they would understand what Jeremiah said about a new covenant coming. We don't want the new, we want the old. So you can appreciate that attitude, particularly also in the New Testament when you have the circumcision party who are trying to, in Christianity, bring in things from the law of Moses. Their view was you first became a Jew, then you became a Christian. So this is very telling in the Gospel of Luke about their attitude concerning what Jesus is doing and how, they're just blinded by their own tradition. They don't see what's happening. So another occasion, Jesus takes the other occasion to do something on the Sabbath day. He's really stirring up because it's like it's intentionally done on the Sabbath because there's a tradition among the Jews, and they think it's law that, of course, no work is to be done, but that didn't forbid everything, particularly good things. And Jesus will say the Lord, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And in other words, there are things that take precedence. And Jesus is illustrating one of these. And he's going to use an argument after he heals somebody when they're disgruntled about that and they charge him of violating the Sabbath because he's working, because he's healing somebody. That's work to them. You can't do anything like that. You can't, raise anybody from the dead or cure a disease. You're working. But they allowed for other things. The law allowed people who were, hungry and all that. They could get wheat and roll it in their hand and eat the kernel and all that. The law allowed that. But they're going to charge the disciples of Jesus and others with violating the Sabbath because they're harvesting. Well, there's to harvest, you need to have a sickle, so there was a divide made. If you don't use a sickle, you do it with your hands and you're starving or whatever. There was accommodations for that. And God's fully aware that there are pressing needs among human beings, and such is the case of God's compassion and his understanding. And so we get in trouble when we start making our tradition and things become such a law that it blinds us to things of Christianity that we should be doing as well. And so I guess it's very easy. I think this is the reason, at least to me, it's very easy to abide by specific rigid laws. I mean, it's kind of like you don't have to even think about it. You know, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong, this is right. It's very hard to have the freedom in Christ. Well, we have laws of Christ, right? But you have, a lot of it is the principles of behavior and you know, mirroring the behavior of Jesus and conforming our minds to him. And that creates a lot of responsibility and accountability on my part, because I have to adjudicate the behavior and understand, like modesty. You know, the principle of modesty, it is taught, the principle, but, you know, it would be really easier if we just had a cold-cut rule, you know, about what it is and what it's not. But we don't. It's just like giving, right? Give as you've been prosper. Well, how much, Lord? You know, 1%, 5%, 10%, you know, more than that. Well, God gives it over to you. Well, we have lots of examples of people who commit in their giving to God, but that puts the onus on us, right? Where we have to reflect, contemplate, and work it out. So that kind of living and that kind of looking at faith is very difficult and challenging, because it causes deliberation, and we got to think, we got to study, you know, and mirror the example of Jesus. But it'd be nice just to have a hard-cut rule about it, you know. Don't do this and don't do that, and that's it. And then, if we were more legalistic, we would add to that to keep us from disobeying that rule. You know, we'd add other things. So it's like modesty. Let's talk about modesty just a little bit. So shorts are immodest, are they? Well, only if they're, you know, if they're below the knee, then that's fine, right? Or when you sit down and it covers the knee, or it's only 6 inches from the knee. I mean, we've gone through all of that, particularly at the university. I mean, it's just kind of comical, actually. And you feel like almost, who cares? That's almost like, you know, you care about it, but how do you define it? So you got to teach the principle in the mind of Christ. Dress in such a way that glorifies God. Okay? Instead of according to, you know, the fads, the styles, what we want. We got to think about, you know, our presentation of ourselves in relationship to the Father that we serve through Christ. So that's more challenging, isn't it? I'd like to have a hard and fast rule so I wouldn't violate it, or, you know. But that is the nature, in many ways, of Christian teaching. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, I remember going, when I was in Jerusalem. It's interesting because, you know, I walked in an elevator and the door's open, you know, it stays open, and I was sitting there pushing the buttons. And then someone told me, hey, this is a Sabbat elevator, so I had to get, you know, over here on the other one. So it was kind of weird. You know, one's designated as, you know, for the Sabbath, so it doesn't work, but the other one works. You know, it's kind of interesting how we work through things like that. You know, okay. So in chapter 6, verse 1, we have, on the Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" They're even ignorant about the law, because the law allowed this kind of thing. Not harvesting and, work of certain kinds, but this isn't considered in the law a prohibition. But that's how they took it, because of the elevation of their traditions. They would be in, there's a Jewish writing, the Talmud, with the Mishnah and all this. This is a pretty good volumes of people or priests discussing various tenets of the Old Testament. So you can read all the rabbinical things. You can walk a rock's throw away, but you can't go further than that. Or they're trying to figure out what it is and how far you can go before you break the law. Now that's really, I don't know. I guess the intention is good, but I don't think the attitude of how far you can go before breaking the law is a good foundation and principle. That's what gets people in trouble, and how they got in trouble with marriage and divorce and remarriage in Judaism. When they were talking about divorce, they're wanting to know, just what is the reasons that we can divorce. And it's just so opposite from the way God was teaching about marriage and commitment. So this is what they're doing. They're being seen. And have you not read, Jesus says, what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him. And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now, in 1 Samuel, I believe it's 21, we have the occasion when David goes to Nob, and he's hungry, he's asking for food, and the priest comes out and gives him the bread of presence, and he eats it. And it was to be replaced daily, and the priests had they would eat the bread, and then they would replace it. So Jesus seems to treat this as a real violation of the law. I mean, he violated the law. It's only for the priest to eat, yet David did. But Ahimelech, the priest, he gave it to him to do it. It wasn't like David stormed into the tabernacle there, or where the things were, where the priest was, and just stole some things. And he was famished, and he was refreshed as a result. But no rabbi would condemn David for doing that. They would actually, in their writings, they seek ways of justifying what he did. It was justifiable. All right? Do you see the argument that Jesus is putting forward? If you allowed David, and you considered it a special, unique situation, and you don't condemn him, you just kind of leave it, overlook it, or whatever, and he was in a real violation of the law, then why are you having this attitude toward us, in that we're not violating the law and taking the grain and rubbing it with our hands? So that's the real conundrum that they are in. They're condemning Jesus for something they allowed someone like David to do, who was actually breaking the law. And yet, Jesus' disciples are only violating the traditions that have developed around the law, because they have, come up with, this is as far as you can go, you can do this, you can't do this. And so they are filled with those kinds of things. Now, in the book of Matthew, remember, Jesus says that their traditions have been elevated and have superseded the commandments of God. So this is one of the things that's happening, is Jesus is challenging their interpretation of things. Not only that, he is exposing their hypocrisy. one greater than David is here. But Jesus isn't violating the law. Okay? That's one of the interesting things here. They're accusing him of violation of the law when they are not. And in actuality, they are the ones who violate the law because of their extreme views and traditions that they have used to surround the law. So he says, let's continue. And Jesus answered them, have you not read that David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him? And he said, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. What do you suppose the meaning of that is? Why does Jesus say this? Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, about the wrong things, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But isn't that the human thing to do? You know, you're yeah, I mean, that's, I don't know why it is, but it seems to be the case. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's that, you know, to see the interaction that Jesus is always in his opposition and his words and his parables and things that he says. I mean, they're just kind of you know, they don't really have a response except to get mad. And that's why someone loses the argument. You know, you get mad. You start, instead of you know, debating or whatever or asking questions, you get mad, then you start, you know, mischaracterizing the other person. Beelzebub, you're Beelzebub. You know, they get louder and louder. So that's just the way human beings are a lot of times. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You've got to be very careful about this passage too, because there are brethren that say that who are doing things that clearly without
Yeah.
authorization
Mm-hmm.
of Testament, who say that this applies. In other words, those of us that have raised concerns about instrumental music, about women preachers, they'll say, well, Jesus did this. And so
Yeah, but see, that's not even the same. That's, y'all see the difference, don't you? He's not doing anything that's violating the law, nor would he encourage that. But he is indicating, really, you know, he's already shown his divinity with his miracles and the things that he's done. They have already witnessed him saying, which is easier, to forgive sin or say, you know, arise and walk. Either one confirms who he is, you know. So for your benefit, I'll say arise and walk. And so they're saying, well, good, he didn't say forgive sins because that makes him out to be God. But he just healed somebody and the guy got up and walked away. Does that say that he's the Son of God as well, or he's divine? You know, there's something about him. So all of this is a testimony. But it's almost how they, some misuse 1 Corinthians 9 when it says Paul becomes all things, all people. It doesn't mean that he is watering down the gospel or he's committing sin or doing sinful things in order to relate to people, because he says, I'm under the law of Christ. But he builds rapport with people. You know, he's able to navigate and move among, interact different kinds of people. So that's what he's teaching. It's the method, not the content. Content stays the same. Yes.
Jesus said that he did not come to destroy the law.
That's right. Fulfill it in every way.
Yeah, and until the Pentecost, you know, the old law was there, still in effect. So if he had not obeyed the law, then that statement cannot be true.
Yeah, yeah.
But he did obey the law.
Committed no sin, you know. Yes.
And all throughout the Old Testament, the Lord, well, throughout the Torah, the
Yeah.
as law. And
Even above it, you know.
Jesus is showing the difference between the two. So the call for obedience is not to be like the Pharisees.
It's not to be legalistic, call for obedience. Because that's, Jesus says, if you love me, what? Keep my commandments? I mean, is that legalism? No. That's fulfilling, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's what that is. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he does every time. And so when he talks about being liberated, not only are they liberated from sin, but we're liberated, as Paul would teach, from the traditions of men and from all who would seek to captivate our minds, philosophies, and religions, and things like that. We're free in Christ. See, we've been liberated from that. Yes? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, Jesus. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
If they'd accepted what he did when he healed the paralytic, that you know the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins, if they thought back about that, they think about what he says here.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. He's the one that instituted the
Yeah.
law. He's the one that's the Lord over it.
Yeah, and we make those connections because we're reading, 2020 backward. We got it. But just imagine if you were there, would you, would you be making those little connections that Jesus did? Well, it's obviously that the Pharisees are blinded by their own filters, traditions, and things of that nature. Yes. Yeah, I would too. Mhm. Oh yeah. Then you would be ready. Yeah. Right. I think that's what Jesus says in John 5, isn't it? Where he says, you read the scriptures, and it's they that point to me. Okay? So, yeah, the Old Testament, its purpose, we find out in many places, is to lead people to the Messiah, to Christ. That's true, in the book of Galatians. It was a tutor, a schoolmaster to lead one to faith in Christ. So, yeah, go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah, we find out a little later about a little sinister that they love money, and they love to be in front of people, and so there was a lot at risk that they were, of risk of losing, that they really wanted and enjoyed, and Jesus challenges that attitude. I mean, why are we really serving? Why am I really teaching? Is there ulterior motive? Do I have a different agenda than that which is God's? All that kind of thing. Why are you serving as an elder? Some have been appointed who love power and end up hurting the church as a result of that. And I'm thinking, how can one ever think like that? Because that's so anti-Christ. Yeah. So, he's Lord of the Sabbath, and truly is. He's the second person of the Godhead, and the Bible says that he's the creator. Through him all things were created. Paul says, he holds all things together, and, rested on the seventh day. So that's interesting. So, verse 6. On another Sabbath, notice the Sabbath, how they line up. Say he's lining them up. Sabbath, Sabbath, Sabbath. That's a structural element, by the way, that I like to hone into because it's carrying the theme of what Jesus is doing. So, on another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether or not he would heal on the Sabbath. Now think about that for just a minute. How does that sound to you? What's your reaction to this?
Can't see the forest for the trees.
I mean, it's kind of surprising, isn't it? I mean, they know that he has healed. Okay, he's also has identified himself as God, the one who can forgive sins. He's already demonstrated by his acts of healing, that there's something about him. And instead of them reflecting on this, he's healed several people, a lot of people. I wonder if we need to rethink this and our opposition to him. What is this saying? But it doesn't faze them. Their automatic reaction is that he's blaspheming and he is violating law. And what disappoints me with this is that these are religious people who should know better. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's you can see it in politics. We send someone that's that seems to be honest and he's fighting for the right things. He goes to D.C. and he comes out a millionaire and he all kinds of things that he's done. It's just kind of, who are you? So yeah. So it's. Yeah, they are teachers to the people, but they despise the people. Yeah. So they're watching him, and this word "watch" is they're scrutinizing his every action. They're really watching him, and so Jesus knows it. He's to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath. Maybe this would be a celebration, and ask Jesus, "Will you heal this person?" What a great thing that would be. So that they might find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their, what? Thoughts. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come and stand here." Okay, so he's going to make a scene of some sort. And he's doing it for the benefit of the Pharisees. So come and stand here. And Jesus said to him, "I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm?" Which one? How many would say it's lawful to do harm? I don't think anybody would. And I think most who raised up their hand, probably it's to do good would be the God way, wouldn't it? He says, another one. Can you save a life or destroy a life on the Sabbath? We want to destroy life, destroy a person on the Sabbath. Who would say that? He says, and after looking around at them, you got to picture Jesus is a formidable individual. And so he brings this guy. They're always planting things. The Pharisees, they plant things to try to trap him. And I don't know whether this guy was planted there. I wouldn't doubt it, just to see if he would heal him. But Jesus is the one who builds the trap. It backfires on him every time. Yeah. 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 That's the dilemma. And I suppose the reason for that is their sin, um, the attitude, um, the traditions that they have developed. They've got so consumed on what they're doing and how people ought to be in every situation that they've lost their way. Yeah.
The ultimate culmination of their thinking is seen in John 11 when Jesus
Oh
raises
yeah.
Lazarus from the dead after 3 days in the tomb,
Uh-huh.
and they conspire together and they say, well, he's done a great miracle. We're going to have to kill him.
Yeah.
And not only that, we need to kill Lazarus.
Yeah.
That's
Kill Lazarus.
dark,
Yeah.
you know?
And that's when they, I think, unite with the Herodians, the political party. So you have the combination of the religious people and the political people who come together to kill Christ after he just raised somebody from the dead. Just think about the unnatural reaction of the Pharisees when they see someone raised from the dead. In order to protect themselves and their position, they want to kill the one who raised the person dead and the one who was raised. So you kill your opponents, that threaten your place. We see all this kind of stuff played out in society today. So it's foreign to us. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's almost unnatural in this situation when they've seen a miracle. But that's sort of the characteristics of human beings. You doubt, you charge with evil, and you're protecting something. They're protecting something. They say they're protecting the law of God, but we find out later when Jesus in Matthew 23 calls them hypocrites, that's not really what they're after. So, if they admit who he is, that changes everything, doesn't it?
And I think that's one thing about the Pharisees is sometimes we get so focused on, well, they're legalistic, they're nitpicky, yes, on their tradition, but we miss the big picture, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
They were hypocrites, as Jesus says. They were whitewashed tombs. Mm-hmm. They missed the big issues.
Yeah, they would. I think Jesus makes a statement that I always found funny. They travel the world to make a proselyte, and they make him twice the son of hell when he converts to Judaism, or to their way. A scathing rebuke. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt about it. We see a mirror. Uh-huh. Yeah. Now, not all Pharisees were bad. I think Nicodemus is an example of a good one. Joseph and others who, no doubt, who are not named, but, we have priests who come to the knowledge of the truth in the book of Acts, a lot of priests. So Jesus is dealing with the extreme hostility that he's facing. So it's the Pharisees in their attitude who break the Sabbath because they misunderstand its principle. And Jesus says, looking around at them, all said to him, "Stretch out your hand," and he did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury. Now notice the language here, filled with fury. The word used here is they went mad. It was raging mad. Fury, and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. They're in the plotting plan. What are we going to do to this guy? Yes. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no doubt. previously in the healing of the paralytic, there are statements that Jesus knew what was in their heart, and often there's some statements indicating his grief about the hardness of their attitude. So yeah, he takes time to look at them. I mean, I take that as he's looking eyeball to eyeball at those who are there, and particularly the Pharisees and the scribes who are watching him, and he does it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Luke 34:34, Jesus tells us why they respond like this. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
Yeah. Yeah. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Yeah. Which, if your treasure is in yourself or your riches or whatever material or the glory you get from men, the honor you get from people, when that's threatened, of course you're going to act the way that the Pharisees are acting.
There was a preacher who's now passed away who had a withered right arm, who would, when there was a debate between one of our brethren and the Pentecostal preacher claiming for miracles, he would sit right on the front row.
Yeah.
And our preacher would say, "There's Brother Holly. He's got faith that God will work and heal him. You say that you can heal. He's there waiting to be healed."
Yeah.
And it never took him up on that.
Yeah. And the thing he would say if he came up there and couldn't do it, he doubted. He has doubts. It's always a way of getting out of it, which is, I don't know, you might have a response on the miracle water. Have you? I know you got it. We talked about the miracle water, and Dallas ordered it. Okay, do not drink. So, have they followed up with letters and calls for donations? Yeah. Okay. Verse 12. In those days, he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. This is interesting. Luke is the one that emphasizes prayer, and often Jesus would, retreat from the crowds to a desolate place and pray. Luke indicates that he prayed all night long, and I see in these placements of Jesus praying somewhat of a revealing of things to pray for. He's about to choose the 12. And before that, what does he do? He prays all night long, and he comes down and he selects the 12. So it makes me wonder in us making choices, significant choices, because the 12 are going to be his ambassadors. He's going to send them out, and they're going to have such a role, and it's not as if Jesus doesn't give some time to that in discussing with his Father. Yeah. 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 And he knows he's going to choose Judas Iscariot. And yeah, I mean, the train has already left. It's going. Right. So it kind of makes you think, about our placement of prayer, or how our prayer life, if it were to mirror Jesus, if you take those particular statements like we did in the beginning, we talked about Luke, there seems to be significant times when that's brought out by Luke, and I wonder if that's somewhat suggestive of how we might look at prayer as well. What are the things? So he's about to make decisions, a major decision. I know it's not as important, but our major decisions that we make, ought to be sort of prefaced with a prayer, don't you think? Sometimes what might be a good opportunity seems on the surface, more money, promotion, those things, may not be the best thing. You see what I'm saying? And so oftentimes we're practical, and so we choose this and that based upon secular things without considering the Lord's way, the Lord's word, and how might, God fit into that. Yes.
Scott, knowing how the examples of how Christ is great, he always says, your will be done. So you have to believe he's asking for guidance to give him
Guidance and strength, and yeah.
for the people that he needs to use to do what he needs to do.
Yeah. I think of the movie, is it Spartan? What is Spartacus, where there's a pit here, and I don't know the main guy. I forgot. I just remember the movie, but yeah, you think when Jesus gets to Judas Iscariot, he's going to go Sparta, kick him in that. Yeah, the 300 is what I'm thinking about. Kick him in the pit because of who he is. Jesus knows who he is. Yeah, there he is. Okay. So we have him coming down. He called his disciples and chose from them. Notice he called his disciples.
How many disciples did he have at this point?
How many? He chose from among them. So, we read about in Matthew, isn't it, where the 70 are sent out and things like that. So there's more disciples than what's specifically recorded, I think. And so he's going to select 12 who will be, his personal students, disciples that he will train and send out. You look like you want to say something.
Well, as we say, 1 Corinthians 15 says after his resurrection he appeared to
500.
brethren.
Yeah.
So at that point there were 500.
Yeah.
It's 120 that meet in the upper room in Acts 1.
Yeah. Well, that was 500 brethren in that location. So I'm sure there were more. But, yeah. So he calls his disciples, going to make a selection. And when he does, this is what he chooses. He chooses Simon, whom he named Peter, and Andrew, his brother, and James and John. They're always, Peter, James, and John, particularly in Matthew, are always the three. It's like he had 12. Among the 12, he had 3, and then among the 3, he had 1 who was really close, being the disciple whom Jesus loved. So there was, I don't think he's showing preferential treatment, but it's almost indicative of how a rabbi would teach his disciples and, get others and teach them. And, others would sort of arise as being more capable than others. Who knows? But there seems to be a distinction somewhat among the disciples of the way Jesus saw them and taught them and unleashed them into the world. Because you remember, Peter, James, and John had the opportunity to witness the transfiguration of Jesus. Often Peter, James, and John were brought into a special situation. The others may have been doing something else. So we have him choosing, and we have Andrew, his brother, and James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Of course, Luke is the writer of the Gospels telling us, beforehand what's going to happen. But that also gives us insight, since Jesus knows what's in a human being. He selects Judas Iscariot. Now, in other lists, we have the name Thaddeus that comes up. And here, Matthew is called by his evidently Jewish name, instead of Levi. So you remember Levi, we talked about tax collector, that could have been Matthew. Levi could have been his name, but it may represent his tribe that he was a part of, which would make it more disgusting that he became a tax collector, because, it was out of the tribe of Levi that priest would come. And so here he's called Matthew. And Judas, the son of James, is probably the same one as Thaddeus. So you have to remember that they had several names. Paul, he had his Roman name, his Jewish name, his family name. Sometimes it creates confusion, but thankfully we have the list of the apostles. And if we do a little matching here and there, we see that they list the same people, but some use their different name. Okay? So we're told that there's going to be a traitor in their midst. This is an advantage that we have as a reader, and we get to see what's this traitor going to do, because he's identified as traitor. Okay, so my time's up. Thank you. Okay. Well, you're late getting in here, man.